Hi, and welcome back to Connection. I'm Howard Green. Today, we're doing this one from home because of Omicron, safety reasons. But let me ask you this. How well do you remember your periodic table from chemistry class? If you're like me, not very well. In particular, 17 elements with names such as erbium, cerium, and lanthanum. They are called rare earths. And if we want more electric vehicles, more wind turbines, and many other things, we need them to make more efficient little electric motors, better sensors to drive efficiencies in manufacturing and other processes, all to get us to a greener economy. Most of the world's current supply of rare earths is in China. But recently, the Prime Minister indicated he wants to protect our rare earth deposits from foreign takeovers. To talk about it all, we are joined by a Canadian company that's been involved in rare earths for some 30 years, Neo Performance Materials, which has made major inroads in China, Europe, and beyond. Its CEO is Constantine Karayannopoulos, and he's my guest today. Great to have you with us, Constantine. It's been a while since we last talked, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Indeed, a real pleasure to reconnect, Howard.
Thanks so much. You're a chemical engineer, so by training, so all of this is familiar to you, and of course, 3 decades in this business. And I just have to say, you must love the words net zero when you hear them.
Well, yeah, it's great for our business as well as it being good for the planet. But yeah, guilty as charged. I am a chemical engineer, and I have to admit that until I got involved with this company back in 1992, I hadn't heard of rare earths. So they're at the bottom of the periodic table, about as the most obscure part of the periodic table. And, eventually you realize how useful and almost indispensable they are to our modern way of life.
So without conducting a chemistry class, maybe give the audience a sense of what they are and what their properties are and why they're so important.
Yeah, sure. They, I guess, try to keep the geek factor low. They all are in a similar part of the same part of the periodic table. They have very similar electronic structures, and as a result, they have very similar properties: physical, chemical, solid state. Today, we use them primarily for catalytic applications. They clean the exhausts on the cars that we drive. They also are used in stationary emission controls. At least I'm speaking about what we do and where we make our money. That's one of our big money makers. Then the other, of course, is in magnetic applications. Rare earth magnets are the strongest permanent magnets known to man, and you find them in use, as you pointed out in your introduction, in sensors and high efficiency electric motors. And of course, today, where the name of the game is energy efficiency, you find them used in a myriad of applications. And of course, the fastest growing being electric motors for electric vehicles, it's a great, fast, large market.
And obviously, we're going to see more of them with every major car maker committing to electric vehicle fleets by such and such a date. But just talking about the current cars that are out there, it's my understanding that the average modern car, if I can put it that way, setting aside electric vehicles and hybrids, has some 140 small electric motors in it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I mean, every power function inside the cabin, your seats, windows, mirrors, etc. All those power functions are conducted by using small, tiny, light, highly efficient motors. And of course, a lot of them use sensors that contain rare earths as well. So yeah, even before EVs, the automotive industry was a very large market for these magnets and the rare earth materials that go in them, as well as other applications. Indeed.
So tell us a bit about your customer base. We were talking about the automotive, but I mentioned wind power, for instance, in the introduction, and I see on your website AirPods, which I wear all the time when I walk around. Are you in all those?
Yes. Actually, in fact, the electronic industry used to be the largest market for rare earths, and we've historically it has been a very significant market for our products. These tiny magnets go into speakers and headphones, of course, but you will find us in pretty well every smartphone that's made in the world. There's about 600 to 700 little tiny chips where our products, very advanced formulations of rare earths, go into to enable the signal transfer inside those all those electronic devices. Vibration motors, when your phone buzzes, that's a small rare earth magnet in that motor. Yeah, as I said, there's a myriad of applications, but clearly electronics is big. Lighting, LEDs use a small amount of rare earths. The previous generation of lighting, high efficiency, low energy lighting, was using a lot of rare earths. LEDs have supplanted them. But again, today, automotive is the biggest segment that consumes rare earths. In our business, about half of our revenues come from the automotive industry. On average in the industry, maybe 30-40% of revenues come from automotive. And then you have electronics, you have medical. There's all kinds of little obscure applications. Like next time anybody has an MRI, there might be a gadolinium contrast, which we have by far the largest market share in the world in the production of that stuff. So yeah, there's all kinds of it's part of the fascination with the industry. There's always new applications coming up, but then there's a myriad of applications that we need to be marketing to and be ready to serve.
You're making me wish that I'd studied chemistry more and maybe now be in that business. But let me ask you, you don't actually mine these rare earths. Other people mine them. You buy from the mines. Tell us about that. And I alluded to China in the intro. Where does all of this come from? Where is it going to come from? And all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, we don't mine. We're not miners. We're not geologists. I mean, we have a few geologists on staff, but we are material scientists, chemists, chemical engineers, electrical engineers. So we start with concentrates that come from mines that other companies operate. And we buy from all over the world. We have a couple of plants in China. So for our Chinese plants, we buy from Chinese mines. Also, in the last couple of years, with the emergence of a large American mine that ships to China, we ultimately buy our raw materials from that supply chain. We buy stuff from Vietnam. We buy from South America, North America directly. We instituted a new deal with a company in the States called Energy Fuels that they recover the rare earths out of tailings from another mining operation. Another company in Georgia in the United States produces, and that stuff goes to our operating plant in Estonia, which is the only commercially operating plant in Europe, and which is fed by the United material from the United States as well as from Russia. So rare earths are everywhere. Canada has a few, has some decent deposits, some very marginal deposits, so it'll be a bit of a tough slog to commercialize them. But the rare earths, you can find them anywhere. So it's only a matter of time before the right exploration geologist hits the right deposit in Canada.
Let's just go to the Chinese control or Chinese dominance, if I can put it that way. There are worries, obviously, about national security implications. Joe Biden, when he took office, instituted a review of critical materials. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. It sounds like the U.S. kind of blew it. They dominated from the 50s to the 80s, but then ceded control or dominance to China. How do we deal with that situation? Because obviously relations between our part of the world and China are a thorny issue. Obviously, you have business there. I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but this is a geopolitical factor in all of this.
Sure, and at times it's very tough to navigate the shoals that get created between governments. It's not only between China and Canada, but it's pretty. Geopolitics has become a lot bigger an issue in the last decade. Listen, I mean, what can I tell you? China. I've had a front seat in China's development since the early 90s, and that development and that growth has been planned, has been deliberate, and it has been done on the basis of very smart industrial strategies. I mean, so I think the Chinese planners, what I like to say about the Chinese planners is that they're great students of history, and they learn from their mistakes and the mistakes of others. So they don't repeat the same mistake twice. So I was saying this to folks that were very worried that, we had a crisis in 2011 with rare earths spiking because of export restrictions from China. And when folks were worried that China would impose, again, export restrictions, I said, not a chance, because the Chinese planners have learned from what happened in 2011. And even though prices went up for a year, then they crashed again and caused all kinds of damage to the industry, including the Chinese rare earth manufacturing and downstream manufacturing industry. So the fact remains that our laissez-faire approach to economics and business in North America, to a lesser degree in Europe, meant that it was very hands-off, and it was everybody for himself. And of course, the Chinese approach, where there's a much closer relationship between industry and government, it appears that today is sort of winning the day, especially with regards to EVs.
Let me just jump. May I just
Sure.
jump in there, because obviously it's very popular to villainize China right now for many good reasons, particularly on the human rights front and the closer to home, the two Michaels situation. But they have been way ahead of us on electric vehicles, for instance, based on what you're describing, that the central planning point of view. Very difficult to get an internal combustion engine car there, but pretty easy, I understand, to get an electric vehicle there. No?
Absolutely. And, we started seeing meaningful production and purchases of EVs in China 5, 6, 7 years ago, before we even started, doing anything about it in the West, because China was always committed to this. First of all, because they need to clean their environment and their air and so on. But at the same time, and if you pay attention to what Premier Xi Jinping has been saying, they want to be self-sufficient. So they do not want to rely on on the import of technologies from abroad, and they want to be self-sufficient. Again, I'm only speculating, but China clearly is behind conventional internal combustion engine technology with regards, when you compare it to Europe, Japan, North America, but they are leading in EV technology. And this was, as I said earlier, deliberate and a result of industrial strategy. So they've been fairly successful so far.
So what about the curve to more electric vehicles? I mean, as I said, pretty much every manufacturer is talking about them now and has fleets planned for X number of years out. Do we have enough rare earths to supply this industry? If we replace the number of internal combustion engine vehicles that we purchase now per year, and we look ahead to that same number of EVs? Running the risk of sort of coming across as being self-promotional or promoting my company, the short answer, Howard, is no. To quote shamelessly a friend who's a consultant in DC, Chris Berry, when Sheriff Brody at Jaws saw the shark, his first reaction: we need expletive deleted bigger boat. And if we're going to transition to net zero, energy efficiency, green technologies, and so on, we need a lot more rare earths. Not only rare earths, but we need a lot more lithium for the batteries, cobalt for the batteries,
nickel for the batteries and the new lightweight vehicles. So and because this is it's a tall order. There's 100 million vehicles, give or take, a year being produced in the world that are internal combustion engine. To go to 100 million EVs is going to take massive infrastructure development, charging infrastructure, but also massive raw material resource development. And that, there is no magic bullet, unfortunately. We will need to mine more lithium, more rare earths, more cobalt, et cetera, and mine it responsibly. And this is where ESG is coming to play a big role. But also, we will need to continue to reduce. We need to drive smaller cars, smaller engines, et cetera. And we will also need to recycle a lot more than we're recycling now. And, every once in a while, I read the odd paper that, the answer to resource scarcity is recycling. Well, it's one of the answers. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle, and we absolutely need to do it. And by the way, this is definitely in our plan, in our Magnet initiative for a European expansion, where the EU is insisting on a circular economy, and so are we. But there's a lot of things that need to happen in order to get to that net zero.
So let me jump on that. I got a number of points I want to get through before we run out of time. But the European scene very well. You have that plant in Estonia, as you mentioned, and their regulatory frameworks and incentives and so forth. Where are we in North America versus Europe on adoption, incentives, regulatory?
Sure. Again, my quick superficial view of Europe versus North America is that Europe is a couple of years ahead, simply because they started with regulatory measures a few years back that clearly gave the consumer incentives to go electric, but also they gave both incentives, but also disincentives, pretty severe monetary penalties to the OEMs if they continue to produce large gas guzzlers and so on. And clearly, they drove the OEMs towards developing EVs, EV drivetrains and EV systems much faster than we're doing in North America. And in North America, there's still a lot of skepticism about the wisdom of going EV. For an engineer like me, I don't see it. I think it's a natural progression in our development. We need to continue to get more and more efficient. And EV
well, a lot of people, sorry to interrupt, a lot of people ask that question. I mean, is an EV, when you factor everything in, from cradle to grave versus driving what you have now into the ground, is it going to be more environmentally friendly? And of course, you need the power source, the electricity source, if the EV is going to be clean as well.
Listen, I haven't done the analysis myself, but a lot smarter folks than me have looked at this, and their conclusion is that the answer is yes. Now, clearly, as I said, there isn't a single silver bullet here, and just if we mine the resources in completely irresponsible ways, and if we manufacture these vehicles in completely irresponsible ways, the answer is clearly no. It doesn't make sense. In fact, it doesn't make sense to drive vehicles at all. But if we're going to be driving, then EVs make all the sense in the world. And don't forget that we're still in the infancy of this industry. Internal combustion has had almost a century of development, and it's gotten pretty good at it. But given the challenges the planet is facing, it's not good enough. So we need to transition to something that has a lot smaller carbon footprint and it's a lot more energy efficient.
I just want to talk about the Canadian situation. I mean, obviously, there's more and more public desire to get away from extractive industries of fossil fuels and the like. And of course, mining rare earths is extractive, but you talked about the importance of doing it responsibly. And so I'm sure that's at the top of governance lists. But David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, I heard him speak at a private event not long ago, and he talked about how Canada doesn't make electric motors. Canada doesn't make wind turbines. Canada doesn't make batteries, smart grids. Are in this country, are we learning from others around the world?
Listen, I mean, in my conversations with policy planners in the Canadian government. The point that I'm making is that, yeah, we built the country on the basis of being great hewers of wood and drawers of water, but the world is changing. We have great university. I mean, I've spent the last 10, 15 years on the board of advisors of the Department of Chemical Engineering in my alma mater, University of Toronto. And I've been trying to make the point, sometimes successfully, that we really need to spend a lot more time and develop expertise in taking basic materials that we get out of the ground in Canada and then adding a lot of value. And, let's not forget, NEO, that's what we do for a living. We take something that someone else has dug out of the ground and manipulate molecules using, a lot of smarts to create materials that perform in very demanding situations. We can do that in Canada. We have all the smart people, and we have all the universities and the educational institutions in the world to do that. So
why isn't it happening though? Why isn't it happening? Because if I had a nickel for every op-ed that was written by a policymaker or CEO in this country talking about how we need more innovation, many of them boring reads, I have to say, although they're right, but as I'm quoting Dodge here, it hasn't happened in this realm. Why hasn't it happened?
Listen, this is way above my pay grade.
Come on.
But, when I look at how, again, all I'm saying is that we need to learn from other people's successes and failures. So when I look at Europe, the Europeans started 3 years ago. They analyzed the problem and they decided that their automotive industry, which is one of the pillars of the European economy, was at extreme risk as the automotive industry was transitioning to EVs, because the high value components, namely batteries and drivetrains, were all coming from Asia, mostly China, Korea, and Japan. So what did they do? They put a bunch of CEOs together in the automotive industry to figure out how their supply chains work. They brought some really smart folks into government that came up with a number of strategies that are making sense. And the net result is that now, after the creation of the European Battery Alliance, Europe, every single global battery producer, Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, Americans, they're all building gigafactories in Europe to make batteries. Now, there's a whole system of universities supporting the technology and supporting the research, but ultimately, it wasn't a single silver bullet. It took government, it took academia, it took business, and it took a little bit of foresight to drive this. One of the things that have helped is the fact that the EU has given this task to think tanks that are not sort of subject to a 4-year or a 2-year election cycle, which means the priorities are not likely to shift from one election to the other. So this is perhaps one of the challenges in our system, where when you're facing an election, your priorities seem to become a lot more short-term and a lot more immediate, instead of the longer-term planning that you need to address something like this.
Well, just sticking with Europe for a second, and supply chains, I understand there's been a quote unquote localization. I mean, when you talk about those companies building those batteries in those countries, or on the continent of Europe, the companies that depend on these things, they don't want to get caught, right, with stuff being offshore and they can't get it due to the kinds of things that we're seeing right now with the global supply chain. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And don't forget that when you leave decision-making to the efficient markets, sometimes you kind of pay the price. The whole drive toward just-in-time that transferred warehouses onto trucks, onto our highways, I think those days are gone. Just-in-time, especially when you're working with supply chains that are very long and very stretched, doesn't work. So the European automotive industry and the electronic manufacturing industry and so on, I mean, they've gone through, like the rest of us, through two to three major waves of the pandemic, and they've had factories shut down, people not working, output not being created. And then you had, let's not forget the crisis in the Suez So next time some captain beaches his boat, his ship onto the banks of the canal, then you shut down for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And that is clearly unacceptable. So that is driving a localization of supply chains, which then in a properly regulated environment gives you the opportunity to drive efficiency, circularity, all those good things in life that we all need to work towards in order to make our place better.
You know, I want to ask you just a couple questions in the time remaining, and one is about the company itself. You're a serious player. You've been at this for a long time. I know your stock was higher earlier in the year. Your market cap, when I looked this morning, just north of about 800 million. Why aren't you like a multi-billion-dollar company now, given the kind of demand for these products and the prospective demand for these products?
Well, that's one way of looking at it, Howard. But also, a year and a half ago, we were a lot smaller. And this is the markets. That's how they work. We came out of the pandemic. Our stock got hammered like everybody else's, and we managed to survive because we had a great balance sheet, no debt in the company. We came out of it and we started growing again. And now we have a very aggressive strategy to grow the company, not only aggressively, but to grow it in Europe and eventually in North America. As a result of that, I think part of the reason is that we try to address our customers' needs in the largest market, rare earth market in the world, which is China. And by the way, most of our customers in China are big global companies that have their largest facilities in China. So if you're going to be in the rare earth industry, it's tough not to have a China strategy and figure out how to address the supply issues for your customers who are based in China. Regardless, I think that has been a bit of a negative on the company. I mean, in terms of our multiple.
But what I was sorry, I should have phrased it a little bit differently. When you look at the context of the markets and you see a Rivian, which hasn't made a dime, with the kind of market value that it has, electric vehicle maker, and you make a profit and you pay a dividend, but is the market as a whole recognizing the potential in the rare earth space? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. The markets always value future expected cash flows a lot more than current cash flows, I guess. And companies like Rivian, if you assume that Rivian will unfold the same way that Tesla unfolded, it's a good bet, but it's so subject to execution. In the rare earth space, it's a smallish market. It's not very transparent, and China is a big presence in this space. Unfortunately, with all the noise, we haven't been able to make our case. That's on me. I guess I haven't spent enough time in front of cameras and in front of investors around the world, which is, by the way, it's more than half of my time. This is what I do, telling the strategy. But eventually, I expect as greater market forces are affecting positively our business, which is EVs and the energy transition, I expect that the growth of the company will match sort of the hype expected in the markets, and the bottom line will respond accordingly. I mean, as you said, we're making pretty darn good money. We're very profitable, we're very cash flow positive. We have a pristine balance sheet, and we'll continue to take advantage of our presence in a market that is not dominated by any large folks. And I think at least outside of China, it isn't. And I think that's where the growth is for us. And eventually, we would like to be a $2, $3, $4 billion company. Still a lot of work to do, but I clearly feel that our strategy in terms of accessing new markets and new geographies and capitalizing on our strengths, riding these markets, will pan out, and we will be a lot more profitable, and eventually our valuation will reflect that.
One more quick one, if I may, before we go. The company signed on to the UN Global Compact regarding commitments on environment, labor, and human rights. Did you feel it was necessary to do that? Was that something that the world is looking for now, that major institutional investors are looking for now?
First of all, it was the right thing to do. And I mean, a lot of our investors would like us to do a lot of things, but there's a few things that we don't do. But when it comes to environmental, social, and governance practices, the world needs to fundamentally change. Whether this is the right approach remains to be seen, but this is all we got right now for us. So we continue to reduce our carbon footprints. We continue to evaluate everything we do on a daily basis in all of our plants in the West as well as in China. And we're pretty good. We feel pretty good about what we do. Now, signing on to the Global Compact is something that every manufacturer in the world has to do. As I said, not because that's what your customers expect, not because it's just what your investors expect, but it's the right thing to do. So I think you put it all together, it's a small cost for a pretty large benefit. And I think it would be a mistake for companies around the world to ignore this drive because your employees will feel better about what you do, but also your customers and your shareholders. And that sort of ticks off a lot of boxes. A lot of your stakeholders want you to do that, and you'd better be taking a hard look at how you get there. So yeah, we're all in on this. We're very committed.
Constantine, a great pleasure speaking with you again. Many thanks for making time.
Howard, as always, a real pleasure. We'll talk again.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Connection. We'll have a new one every 2 weeks. You can also listen to the show via the podcast, our podcast, on all the major podcasting platforms. And there will be excerpts of our conversations in Toronto Star and thestar.com. I'm Howard Green. See you next time.